The review in the local paper wasn't exactly what you'd call glowing. Luna's Diner brings simple, home-style cooking to Mason Creek. While lacking the sophistication of big city establishments, it offers hearty portions at reasonable prices. My brother Jack would have a field day with this one. I could already hear his mocking voice. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. From the Anderson Hotel Group's executive dining rooms to serving meatloaf in a small-town diner. The thing is, I loved my hillbilly diner, as Jack called it. Loved the regulars who came in every morning for coffee and conversation. Loved creating seasonal menus using produce from local farms. Loved the feeling of building something that was entirely mine. Well, mostly mine. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see Tom Franklin, Dad's longtime attorney, sliding into a booth. My stomach clenched. He never came to Mason Creek unless something was wrong. Lucy, he said as I approached with a coffee pot. We need to talk. I poured his coffee, noting how his hands shook slightly. Dad? He nodded grimly. It's time. The doctors say a few days at most. I sank into the booth across from him, my legs suddenly weak. We'd known this was coming. Pancreatic cancer doesn't leave much room for hope. But hearing it made final was different. Jack's flying in tonight, Tom continued. Your father wants to see you both. Both of us? Together. I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Dad had always handled us separately since the split 3 years ago, when I'd left the family business to open my diner. He insists. Tom took a sip of coffee and added carefully, there are things he needs to explain. To both of you. The drive to Pittsburgh took just over 2 hours, giving me plenty of time to remember the last conversation I'd had with my father about the family business. The hotel group needs fresh vision, he'd said, his voice weak even then. Modern ideas. Jack understands that. By modern you mean turning our historic properties into soulless luxury boxes? I challenged. Replacing local character with corporate uniformity? It's called branding, Lucy. Jack knows how to build a consistent customer experience. By firing staff who've worked for us for decades, by cutting ties with local suppliers. That's not what Mom would have wanted. The mention of Mom, gone 15 years now, had made him flinch. Your brother knows what he's doing. The profits prove it. Some things matter more than profits, Dad. I'd walked out that day, found the empty diner for sale in Mason Creek, and used my savings to build something that aligned with my values, something Mom would have understood. The family's flagship hotel, the Anderson Grand, loomed ahead as I exited the highway. Once a testament to elegant hospitality, it now sported the sleek, modern aesthetic Jack preferred. The historic facade remained, but the soul of the place had been stripped away. Jack's Ferrari sat in his reserved parking space, next to Dad's empty spot. My dusty pickup looked decidedly out of place as I pulled in beside them. The private elevator to Dad's penthouse still recognized my fingerprint, somewhat to my surprise. Jack was already there, pacing the luxurious living room in one of his trademark Italian suits. The prodigal sister returns, he sneered. Did you remember to wipe the grease off your hands before touching anything? Jack, Dad's voice, weak but sharp, came from the bedroom doorway. That's enough. He looked worse than I'd expected, gaunt and pale, a shadow of the powerful man who'd built a single historic hotel into a luxury chain. But his eyes were clear and alert as they moved between us. Sit down, both of you, he commanded. Tom will be here soon with the papers, but first, we need to talk. Jack sprawled elegantly on the leather sofa while I perched on an armchair, feeling out of place in my simple dress and practical shoes. 3 years ago, Dad began, I made what appeared to be a terrible mistake. I let my daughter walk away from the family business over what seemed like irreconcilable differences in vision. Jack smirked. Finally admitting you should have stopped her? No, Dad's voice was firm. I'm admitting I should have told you both the truth then. About the company. About your mother's final wishes. About who really owns what. My brother's smirk faltered. What are you talking about? I run the company. I've doubled our profits, expanded the brand. You've managed operations, Dad corrected. Under what you thought was my ownership. He turned to me. Lucy, do you remember the trust your mother set up before she died? The education trust? Of course, it paid for my hospitality degree. That was one trust. There was another. Dad pressed a button on his phone. Tom, we're ready. The elevator dinged and Tom walked in carrying a thick folder. According to your mother's will, he began, the Anderson Hotel Group was to be held in trust until certain conditions were met. The trust would transfer full ownership to whichever of her children demonstrated not just business acumen, but the values she believed were essential to true hospitality. Jack sat up straighter. Well, obviously that's me. The profits alone were achieved at the cost of everything your mother valued. Dad cut in. Local connections, employee loyalty, community investment. The business was failing. Jack protested. All that sentimental nonsense was dragging us down. Was it? Tom opened his folder. Because I have some interesting documents here about exactly how those increased profits were achieved. Creative accounting, supplier kickbacks, misappropriated renovation funds. The color drained from Jack's face. Did you think no one was watching? Dad asked quietly. That no one would notice how much money was disappearing into offshore accounts. I can explain. No need. Dad nodded to Tom, who pulled out another document. The trust transferred ownership 3 years ago, when one of you demonstrated the perfect balance of business sense and ethical principles. My heart stopped as I realized what he was saying. Lucy has owned the Anderson Hotel Group since the day she walked away from it, Dad said simply. Walking away rather than compromise her values was the final test. Every decision Jack has made since then has been unauthorized. Every penny he's diverted is documented. And now it's time for a change. The silence that followed was deafening. That's impossible. Jack finally sputtered. She runs a diner in the middle of nowhere. A profitable diner, Tom corrected, that sources locally, pays living wages, and has become a cornerstone of its community. Exactly the values your mother wanted the hotels to embody. While maintaining a healthy profit margin, I added quietly, because Mom was right, you can be successful without sacrificing your soul. You knew? Jack rounded on me. You knew you owned everything while I was running the company? No, I said truthfully. I had no idea, but it explains why you were never able to sell any of the historic properties, doesn't it? Why certain changes required approval from a mysterious board of trustees. Dad started coughing, and Tom quickly helped him to a chair. I should have told you both sooner, he gasped. Should have stopped Jack's mismanagement before it went so far. But I needed to be sure Lucy was ready. Ready for what? I asked. To take control, to restore what your brother has damaged, to lead the company the way your mother always believed you could. He gestured to Tom, who pulled out one final document. It's time, Lucy. The trust supervision period ends today. You have full control of all assets, properties, and operations of the Anderson Hotel Group. My hands trembled as I read through the papers, understanding finally dawning about why certain investments I tried to make for the diner had been mysteriously approved despite exceeding my apparent means. You can't do this, Jack was saying, his voice rising in panic. I have contracts, commitments, all of which will be audited, Tom said calmly. Along with your personal accounts, I suggest you cooperate fully. It will look better for you in the end. I looked at my brother, seeing not the polished executive he pretended to be, but the scared little boy who'd always needed to prove himself the best, the most successful, the most worthy. Jack, I said softly, did you ever wonder why Mom's portrait was removed from the Grand's lobby? He blinked at the apparent non sequitur. It didn't fit the modern aesthetic. It was removed, Dad said, because she would have been ashamed of what you turned her hotels into. Places where profit matters more than people, where legacy is sacrificed for quick returns. The portrait's in my office at the diner, I told them. She watches over us every day, reminding me that true hospitality comes from the heart, not the bottom line. I stood up, smoothing my simple dress. I'll need to see the books. All of them. Every property, every account, every transaction for the past 3 years. Already prepared, Tom said, patting his briefcase. And Jack? I turned to my brother, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the past hour. You have a choice to make. Help us uncover and correct everything that's gone wrong, or face the consequences alone. Either way, changes are coming. The look he gave me could have frozen hell itself. You'll regret this. All of you. He stormed out, the elevator doors closing on his threats. But I'd seen the fear behind his anger. He knew exactly what an audit would reveal. Dad reached for my hand. Are you ready for this? I thought about my little diner, about the community I built there, about the lessons I'd learned by starting small and staying true to my principles. Yes, I said firmly, but I'm doing it my way, starting with the grand. Little did Jack know, his angry exit was just the beginning. What I would discover in those books and what I would do with that information would reshape not just the Anderson Hotel Group, but our entire family's legacy. The Anderson Grand's executive boardroom felt colder than I remembered. Maybe it was the steel and glass decor Jack had installed to replace the warm mahogany paneling. Or maybe it was the chill emanating from the team of forensic accountants presenting their findings. In summary, the lead auditor concluded, "We've identified approximately $47 million in misappropriated funds over the past 3 years. The methods were sophisticated: fake renovation contracts, inflated supplier invoices, ghost employees, but the documentation is clear." I studied the spreadsheets projected on the wall, each line item telling its own story of greed and betrayal. The Harrisburg property renovation, I noted, pointing to a particularly large figure. The historic ballroom that was too damaged to save, according to Jack's reports. Never actually damaged, the auditor confirmed. The allocated restoration budget was diverted to an offshore account, and the space was converted to a modern conference center using substandard materials. My mother had loved that ballroom, had hosted charity galas there, community events, local wedding receptions at reduced rates. Now it was a sterile box of cheap drywall and fluorescent lighting. What about the staff pension fund? The auditor grimaced, severely underfunded. Mr. Anderson, Jack, had been using it as a personal line of credit. We estimate about 340 current and former employees have been affected. Each revelation felt like a physical blow. Not just the theft and fraud, but the systematic dismantling of everything our family had built, everything our mother had valued. Miss Anderson. My assistant Sarah poked her head in. "Your brother's here, with his lawyer." I nodded. "Show them in." Jack swaggered in like he still owned the place, but I could see cracks in his facade. His suit was slightly rumpled, his eyes haunted. The lawyer beside him looked nervous. "Come to beg for your trust fund back?" Jack sneered, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Sit down," I said quietly. "You need to see this." For the next hour, we walked through the evidence. Every fraudulent transaction, every betrayed employee, every broken community promise. Jack's face grew paler with each revelation. "My client is prepared to make restitution," his lawyer jumped in. "A payment plan." "This isn't about money," I cut him off. "This is about legacy, about trust, about the people who depended on us." I pulled out an old photograph, Mom in front of the Harrisburg Hotel on opening day, surrounded by smiling staff members. "Every person in this photo was fired under your management, Jack. People who'd given decades to our family's business. They were inefficient, set in their ways." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I was modernizing." I laid out more photos. The local farmers who supplied our kitchens, the artisans who maintained our historic properties, the staff who knew guests by name and treated them like family. "All replaceable," he muttered, but wouldn't meet my eyes. "Nobody is replaceable," I said firmly. That's what Mom understood. What I learned running my hillbilly diner: success comes from valuing people, not just profits. "And look where that got you," he shot back. "Cooking meatloaf in the middle of nowhere while you committed major financial fraud." I finished. "While you destroyed our mother's legacy for your own greed." His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should discuss plea arrangements." "I'm not pressing charges," I said quietly. Both men stared at me. "You were destroying everything that made our hotels special." I laid out more photos. The local farmers who supplied our kitchens, the artisans who maintained our historic properties, the staff who knew guests by name and treated them like family. "All replaceable," he muttered, but wouldn't meet my eyes. "Nobody is replaceable," I said firmly. That's what Mom understood. What I learned running my hillbilly diner: success comes from valuing people, not just profits. "And look where that got you," he shot back. "Cooking meatloaf in the middle of nowhere while you committed major financial fraud." I finished. "While you destroyed our mother's legacy for your own greed." His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should discuss plea arrangements." "I'm not pressing charges," I said quietly. Both men stared at me. "What I want is restoration." I opened my laptop, pulled up a document. "This is a complete confession and repayment agreement." Sign it, and you'll avoid criminal charges. But there are conditions. Jack's eyes narrowed. What conditions? First, full repayment of everything you stole, including the pension fund. I know about your hidden accounts in the Caymans. That money comes back. His face went from pale to gray, but he nodded. Second, you'll help us restore what you damaged. The Harrisburg Ballroom, the historic features you destroyed at other properties, all of it gets fixed properly. That'll take years. Yes, it will. Which brings me to the third condition. I met his eyes steadily. You'll work for me, not as an executive, but as a regular employee, starting in maintenance at the Harrisburg Hotel, working alongside the kind of people you thought were beneath you. You can't be serious. Dead serious. You'll learn every aspect of real hospitality from the ground up. Maybe then you'll understand what you nearly destroyed. His lawyer leaned over, whispered urgently in his ear. Jack's shoulders slumped. And if I refuse? Then Tom has a very interesting file ready for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. 10 minutes later, Jack's shaky signature was on the agreement. As security escorted him out, he turned back. Why? He asked. Why not just throw me in jail? Because you're still my brother, I said simply. And Mom believed in redemption. The next year was a blur of activity. We rehired many of the fired employees, restored damaged properties, rebuilt community relationships. The Anderson Grand's lobby welcomed back Mom's portrait, now flanked by photos telling the story of our hotel's history and connection to local communities. Jack started his redemption journey cleaning bathrooms at the Harrisburg Hotel. Last month, he was promoted to maintenance supervisor, not because of his name, but because he'd earned it. I sometimes catch him talking to guests about the building's history, showing the same pride in preservation that he once dismissed as sentimental nonsense. Yesterday, I called a company-wide meeting at the Grand. Every employee, from housekeepers to executives, gathered in a restored ballroom. The original chandelier, which Jack had sold to a collector, sparkled overhead. Found, repurchased, and reinstalled where it belonged. 1 year ago, we started a journey back to our roots. Not back in time. We've modernized where it makes sense, embraced new technology and techniques. But we've done it while honoring what matters most. Our people, our communities, our legacy of true hospitality. I gestured to the screens around the room, showing our latest financial reports. And guess what? Turns out Mom was right. When you do things the right way, success follows. Our guest satisfaction scores are the highest in our history. Our employee retention rate is nearly perfect. And our profits, actually higher than they were under the old system. In the back of the room, I saw Jack duck his head, but not before I caught his smile. But the number I'm most proud of, I continued, is this one. I clicked to the next slide. Thanks to your hard work and dedication, we fully restored the pension fund. With interest. Every person affected by the previous mismanagement has been made whole. The room erupted in applause. I saw tears on many faces, including some who'd lost hope of ever recovering their retirement savings. And speaking of restoration, I added, I'd like to announce our next project. We're opening a new property. Murmurs of excitement rippled through the crowd. Well, technically an old property made new again. I clicked to the final slide, a picture of my diner in Mason Creek. The Anderson Inn at Mason Creek will be our first boutique country hotel. Small, personal, deeply connected to its community. Everything that made this company great in the first place, just on a cozier scale. I saw Jack making his way through the crowd toward me. The diner's kitchen will become our test facility for farm-to-table initiatives across all properties, I continued. And yes, we're keeping the meatloaf on the menu. Later, as employees celebrated with champagne and local delicacies prepared by our restored culinary team, Jack approached me. You were right, he said softly. About everything. Mom would be proud of what you've done here. What we've done, I corrected. You've changed too, you know. He smiled ruefully. Had to. Hard to maintain a superiority complex when you're unclogging toilets. Actually taught me more about hospitality than business school ever did. Speaking of learning, I pulled out an envelope, ready for a new challenge. Inside was a promotion offer, general manager of the Mason Creek property. You want me to run your hillbilly hotel? He asked, but the old mockery was gone from his voice. I want you to help me show the world that small doesn't mean insignificant. That luxury isn't about marble lobbies and uniform decor, but about genuine care and connection. He studied the offer, then looked at me with suspiciously bright eyes. Think they'll accept me? After everything? Mason Creek is all about second chances, I said. Just ask any of my regular diners. Last week, we broke ground on the Mason Creek expansion. Mom's portrait will have a place of honor in the new lobby, alongside photos of local farmers who supply our kitchen, artisans who'll maintain the property, and staff members who make hospitality more than just a business buzzword. Jack's already there, learning the community, working to earn trust. Yesterday, I overheard him passionately explaining to a contractor why we're keeping the diner's original 1950s counter. Not because it's profitable, but because it matters to the people who've gathered there for decades. Sometimes the smallest places teach the biggest lessons. Sometimes the longest journey leads right back home. And sometimes true success isn't about what you own, but about what you choose to preserve. Mom understood that. Now finally, so do we.